You could see the anxiety on Kate's face about the blue go.
And we're live. It's Wednesday, April 14th, 5:06 p.m. We are a little late because we had some tech glitches through the miracle of the internet getting Jillian to show up from all the way from Berlin, Germany, to be with us to talk about her book. Hello, that was like actually pretty good. You just kind of
we announced the screen and like dove into the screen.
And so
I do have a theater background. Not at all.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Jillian York back on. Oh, that looks beautiful.
I'm allowed to have fun again.
No, you're not.
I just got my second vaccine shot today. I've got a mojito here in a pineapple tumbler sent to me by one Kate Klonick. And I think I am now allowed to have fun again.
I don't. Yeah. If we had, by those rules, Ben, we would
have allowed to have. You were allowed to have fun months ago.
I know. I was. Yeah. So, but Jillian, it's so nice to have you on the show and to talk about your new book, Silicon Values, which you have been working on forever. And we have talked about in process for so long. So I'm thrilled to see your face. This is so great.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. Cheers. Cheers to y'all.
Cheers.
Port.
Oh, you're drinking port. It looked like a very dark German beer or something.
No. This is a gift from MEP Karen Melchior. She's a lovely member of the European Parliament. She gifted me a bottle of port after I gave a talk with her. I'm not sure I should share that publicly, but hey, I just did. So there we go.
No. That's really nice.
Cheers, Karen, if you're out there.
Cheers. I tried port for the first time recently, and I found that I liked it quite a bit, surprisingly. It was very good.
I tried port for the first time in Porto with Andy Carvin from when he was working at NPR, and I don't remember what happened after that.
That's an excellent story. So, Jillian, I want to talk about your book, but we were talking a little bit. You're in Germany.
I am. That's why it's so dark.
Yeah, I know. But tell us, we were talking a little bit pre-game show about kind of what's happening in Germany with the rollout and everything else, but bring everyone into the loop.
Yes. So here, sorry, I can't even do it with a straight face. Here in Germany, you may notice I just shaved my head. And that's because we were just allowed to get haircuts for the first time in 8 months.
And you're planning ahead. You've got
planning it. Oh yeah, no. So I'd been I had kind of a side shave, and then I had two sides shaved. And I was doing it myself throughout the pandemic, and it was starting to get really sloppy. And I walked in, my hairdresser was just like, "Girl, no, taking that right off. We're starting over." So, yeah,
it looks great. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, but we're behind on everything here. Germany and Canada today were announced to be 2 out of the 3 best countries in the world, and yet we are 2 of the 3 countries in the world that are completely behind everybody in the vaccination process. So I guess they're sort of behind on that ranking.
I mean, there's kind of an inverse relationship among advanced and industrialized countries, among countries that have bad COVID problems being good on the vaccination side. So UK, US, Israel, all handled initial COVID very, very badly, all have excessive mortality from it, all did a completely a subpar job on the front end and did outsized good work on the vaccination side. The countries that did well on the management side of COVID, Canada, Germany, the big countries anyway, are really behind on the vaccine side. And I wonder if that's just that the urgency wasn't as, we had 500,000 people dead. We really had to, and I think there's something similar happened in Israel, actually, where you had they realized that they had very little capacity to control the behavior of certain segments of the population, that they didn't have the ability to deal with things through, social cohesion and telling people how to behavioral aspects, but they could buy enough vaccine to jab everybody in the arm and bring the rate down that way. And Germany is exactly the opposite. It's like, it managed the front end sufficiently well that I wonder if there was just a lack of urgency on the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit of that, little bit of capitalism, little bit of like, it's just a sprinkling of, I mean, I think really like with Germany and Canada, there's this orderliness that both countries feel has to happen. Like you must have these people go first and then these people next and these people. And I'm not convinced that was the right approach. Like I actually do think that, I know the U.S. Obviously, states have handled it differently. I'm from New Hampshire, where I think New Hampshire is already vaccinating under 16-year-olds. So I'm like, okay, should I just fly home? But yeah, it's. I think that the sort of all-in approach is a better one, and I think we're kind of catching up here, but slowly.
It was like, I feel like hindsight's a little 2020 because there was just this feeling that it was going to be a bum rush, that everyone was going to kind of, want to get this, and it had to be carefully managed and controlled. And you saw, at least in New York City, that like not only was the rollout kind of terrible logistically, like in terms of people signing up for website after website after website, getting like filling out all their stuff, then finding that there were no slots left, like type of thing over and over and over again for hours. But kind of once that scaled up, and they opened it up more generally, it really, I think you're right. I think that, but there was no way of kind of predicting that people would kind of orderly sign up for their time and come when they were supposed to come and everything else. But I am fingers crossed for you getting the vaccine very soon. I am really hoping. And so, yeah, keep us up.
I've got like ticket to Serbia booked just in case. Serbia is like the master of vaccines. I don't know if y'all know that, but
I did not know that. Did you know that?
Oh, yeah. This is really wild.
They've done a very good job.
Yeah.
Tell me more. What happened in Serbia?
Well, so Serbia had an epidemic of, oh gosh, sorry. I know the Serbian word for it, which is really weird. My best friend in Berlin is Serbian. Smallpox. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brain. So they had a smallpox outbreak in the 70s. And so they've handled a pandemic in recent history. And I think that like much more recently than anyone else, I think. And so I think that might have something to do with it. As well as I don't know, quite organized.
Aren't they using the Russian
They've got
vaccine?
The Chinese one and the Pfizer. No,
AstraZeneca.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I had no idea, but I don't want to fritter away our time just talking about kind of mining you for details about the EU. I am like, you have worked so hard in this book. The book is Silicon Values, The Future of Free Speech Under Surveillance Capitalism. It is there needs to be like, this is just, thank you for grabbing it. My copy is at my office. Thank you. So it's a great, it is just fantastic. And we talked a lot about it while you were writing it. So just kind of give us the overview that you've kind of been doing as you've been on your Zoom book tour.
Oh, yeah. Zoom book tour. Who
is shitty.
But also like health-wise. So, I mean, I think this is probably public knowledge to most people, but like I'm a cancer survivor and I actually had treatment during the pandemic. I'm doing really well. Thank you, everyone. But if I had to go on a book tour, even without a pandemic, like I would be so sick right now.
Yeah.
And instead I get to just be like, okay, I want to turn off you guys and like go lay down on my couch. There are some pluses, let's just say. So no, I mean, the book. Okay, the book. So 10 years, really. This is like 10 years in the making. I think the first time somebody said that I needed to write a book was around 2012, which is when I was just getting started. And I was like, yeah, I'll get to that later. And then, it kind of creeped on me over the years. And I remember Ethan Zuckerman, Yevgeny Morozov, all of these people just being like, write it down, write a book. And when I met my partner, around that time was around the time that it was really kind of going, okay, I think I really actually need to do this now. And yeah, I sat down, wrote a book, and it details basically what I see is the past almost 15 years now we're looking at of social media content moderation history. With some blind spots, to be fair, Amazon viewers.
So just for background, you were at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard for a while and doing research there. Then you joined the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is, I don't know how to kind of categorize. You've given me the long history. We don't need to get into it here, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation has been kind of to protecting kind of individual liberties on the internet for a very long time. And you now are the head of the freedom of expression. Yeah. And so what is the thesis of the book? What are Silicon values?
Well, so Silicon values are US centric for starters. They are, insular. They are thinking of the privileged user, not the user, somewhere far away, not Germany, but, Germany too. They are, sorry, it's what are Silicon values? How do it's really the ideologies created by a narrow group of people, in the ivory tower of
Silicon Valley.
Yeah, exactly. And so, this ideology is created by a very narrowly focused, narrow mindset, overuse the word narrow here, group of individuals without the kind of sociological and historical background to understand the ways in which their products would be used. And so when we look at the history of this, I speak very well in examples, so you'll probably want to pull me onto one of those for a minute so I don't ramble too much. But when, Jesus, sorry. Close that
I'll
tab.
have 8 million windows and boxes open.
I'm like, where's this notification even coming from? There we go.
Notifications are okay.
Yeah, part of the charm of the low tech nature of In Lieu of Fun. But yeah, so let's talk about some of the examples. Give us kind of what do you think is kind of, what is your favorite kind of example of Silicon values or something coming out of this book? The idea that the trade-offs that someone made in a particular instance that really strike you as making the wrong calculation because they were in Silicon Valley and so removed and so kind of driven by capitalism.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the key examples in the book comes from Egypt a decade ago. When we look at the Egyptian Uprising that happened in 2011, let's look a little bit behind that to 2010. So in 2010, there was a young man named Khaled Said. He was 26 years old, and he was shot by police, beaten by police. Wow. America just kind of went into my brain. Beaten by police. So this was an instance of police brutality, and that really, just struck a lot of people. And as such, people created a page in his name, Khalna Khaled Said. We are all Khaled Said. And that page grew and grew and became a space for discussion, for conversation, and for a movement ultimately. But and that is the page, by the way, to kind of hit the punchline too early. That is the page that eventually called for the January 25th uprising. But on Thanksgiving weekend in 2010, in the US, I was, working and getting all these emails, what is this? And I'm seeing these emails from Danny O'Brien and Rebecca McKinnon, and they're CCing like Sheryl Sandberg and Elliot Schrage and these people like who are still high up in Facebook's executive team, that the page has gone down. It's just gone. We don't know why. And what had happened was that it was removed because the person who was the administrator of the page had been using a pseudonym. Reasonably so. He's, Egyptian, not in a safe circumstance. And so he, gets caught in this loop with Facebook, gets shut, or not even the loop. That's what happens now. Back then, he just gets shut down and told, you're like, that's it. Story over. And so we stepped in, and they stepped in, really. I was kind of almost on the sidelines of this.
Who's they, EFF or?
No, Danny O'Brien is at EFF now. He was at the time at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Rebecca McKinnon back then don't know what her affiliation was at the time, but she's now ranking digital rights.
Yep.
And I was at Berkman, and we were all just kind of scrambling to figure this out.
Right. So one of the things that I've always been struck by, just to go to another example, is the story that I've talked about in the show a few times, and that that you obviously know, which is the Napalm girl incident in 2016, right? So in the fall of 2016, a prominent Norwegian journalist posted a picture of Thomas Utz's terror of war photo, which was a picture of, I think, a 7-year-old girl naked running down the street of her Vietnamese village after it had been bombed in the Vietnam War by Agent Orange. And it's a very powerful photo. It won a Pulitzer Prize. And it had been put up on Facebook by this prominent Norwegian journalist and taken down. And I think he'd gotten a strike against his account, or like his account had been closed down for a few hours. I can't remember. And he comes back and he is just rip shit, like, frankly, and like goes on this campaign to be like, Facebook is censoring historical information. And then it gets taken up by the Norwegian prime minister, and then they remove it from her page. And then there's like, fast forward to like Norway, like a bunch of, I think the third most popular Aftenposten, the third most popular, newspaper in Norway, posts a picture of the photo on the front page, and like a letter to dear Mark Zuckerberg, like that, basically calling for them to do this. It was, people might remember this, they might not, but for the platforms, it was a reckoning moment, right? It was a moment where they finally realized that they could not solve all of their problems by just taking things down, right? Like exactly what you described. And that there would be really powerful people that would be very upset. Do you think that is that something that you touch on in the book? Is that something that you talk about? Because I think that like, this is something we've talked about. So I'm interested to hear if you think that this has progressed since 2016 and gotten better or gotten worse.
That was such an interesting story. I think I spoke to the, wow, like, sorry, I think we all have pandemic brain, right? Like we're all there. I spoke to the European Parliament back then at that time with that editor and with a couple of other folks. And we were, we actually gave a talk around that. And what I recall was that there was a really interesting element of that story that kind of didn't get told, which was that photo was controversial to begin with, and that editors had actually like really, hemmed and hawed over whether to put it out in the public in the first place, way back in the day. I'm talking newspapers. And so I think that, that piece of the story kind of got lost in it all. But have things changed since then? I mean, no, I think things have gotten worse, frankly. So let me rewind just a bit before that. That was what, 2017?
I just actually pulled up the Facebook post it was 2016. Yeah, it was 2016. It was September of 2016.
About a year or two before that, there had been a different situation involving the real name policy, Facebook's real name policy, where a bunch of drag performers in San Francisco had all gotten booted off the service at the same time, like just systematically kicked off. We assumed that this was because people were clicking and reporting them. You're violating the policy, etc. But what happened was that, sorry, I'm like so tired, you guys.
No, I know. Take your time. It's fine. This is like low key. Don't even worry about it.
I know.
And you've been on Zoom all day. It's like
I tweeted this like just for the record, for the proverbial record. This is like my 9th hour of calls. I've just been like on camera all day, so I feel crazy.
Just relax. It's totally fine. Like you're like I just kind of wanted to have I'm just kind of actually curious. Like I think that there's so let me just cut it. So the drag performers, there's generally been kind of like this huge let's take down nudity because it's easy and salacious, and there's it's like gray power. It's not it's not strong power. It exists in the space that they're not going to go and get police or something to kind of go and put this shit back up. And so it's easy for Facebook to put down because already people who are existing in sex work or pornography or whatever else are disempowered by society. And so I think that kind of, if I may, I think that one of the things that I would love to hear your thoughts on are basically kind of how do you this is the dichotomy that you're basically kind of pulling out in your book, which is that there is this there are these powerless masses who are regularly censored, and Silicon Values decide that it's easy to censor them and at low risk because of capitalism, because they don't, and then there are these historic moments that become incredibly high profile, like something like Napalm Girl, and powerful people get involved. Right. And basically that the values end up going wherever the power is, and that they are not kind of first principles on their own. Does that make sense?
No, I think that you just described my book far better than I could. It's been in my head so long. That's the hard thing about writing a book, is that once it's out, you're like, oh, I'm done. I don't think I've reread it. Does Julia Roberts go back and watch her movies? I don't know. Wow, I did not just compare myself.
That's actually all she does. She sits around all day watching her movies. And that's the difference between you and Hollywood people.
Yeah,
clearly.
I have a question about, it seems to me the fundamental Silicon value is that they want bright line rules that are easy to implement. They don't deeply care what the rule is. So, if it's no female breasts, right? They can live with that rule. If it's no female breast except when it's about breast cancer, they like that rule a little bit less well because it's a little bit more complicated, right? They like the rule, we believe in freedom of speech, a lot because it requires nothing of them. They like the rule, we believe in freedom of speech, except when X, Y, Z, A, B, C, a lot less. And so it seems to me the basic conflict here is that there is no rule that is simple to articulate, that doesn't have too many exceptions to be simple to implement. And so if you say no videos of burning children, which seems like a perfectly reasonable rule, then somebody will come up with Napalm Girl, right? Which the Prime Minister of Norway will actually have strong feelings about, that this is an important thing to talk about.
Well, right? It's not burning children. She's not on fire. I'll give you one better.
No, she's just a burnt child.
No pictures of naked children, in right? And okay, but then what do you do with trying to share with your grandmother or and all of your family members pictures of your kids taking their first bath?
Right.
And that's what it comes down to, right? Is that it's really hard around those bright lines to to actually draw that and then apply it to every single user consistently in every circumstance. And this is what these companies are just functionally unable to do.
And so isn't the fundamental problem that their fundamental value, which is ease of operation, because that's what maximizes profitability, is actually indefensible given the mores of our society? And our society here is, I acknowledge, totally different in Thailand than it is in Botswana, than it is in Washington. But whatever your conception of our society, whatever, like, it's not consistent with the sort of bright line rules that they would tend most to favor.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And I think that they also tend to, Facebook in particular tends to be really conservative when they're looking at other parts of the world. And so rather than invest the time and resources into getting the details right, they'll just blanket ban certain things in certain regions. And that's something that's sort of, it's almost new. I mean, we've seen it increasingly during the pandemic, but also, around the past couple of years, like, to give a very clear example that I think is going to be coming up a lot more, like, some of the LGBT products that Facebook offers are not available in certain regions of the world. So if you're in Poland, even, have log. And that to me is striking, because Poland is part of the European Union, which guarantees, right? Like, we have we have laws here. And so, but also Lebanon as well. Like, Lebanon, there's a high court in Lebanon that has determined, or that I'm going to get the Lebanese ruling wrong. I'm not an expert on Lebanese law, but there is a high court ruling there around the right to express one's sexual identity. And so, that being said, like, these companies are not doing the research. They're just kind of blanketing certain regions. If they're not profitable, it's not that interesting, and so on.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I wonder, Ben, if you have thoughts on this too. I'm curious if there's, like, do you feel, I haven't read the last part of the book. Do you come to a part of, well, I just haven't read anything, literally, Jillian, I've been teaching, I'm so tired.
I bought these. I had to buy a bookshelf for all the books I bought.
I love that you admit that you haven't read books on your bookshelf. I'm like, everyone is that, Jillian. No one else.
I have read every single book that you can see in my
in your square,
in my screen. Even if you expand the screen so that I take up the whole screen, I still will have read every single book, and I have fired every single cannon.
I will say this. So I'm curious what you think, and this is kind of getting to Jack Goldsmith and Tim Wu, kind of who controls the internet question. We're going to get to a point where you have, basically, I think you're going to have to pick values for Silicon Valley to articulate. And so whose values, right? Is it like this imperialism type of idea, or we're bringing civilization, or we're bringing French values
on the internet, which is who put that one forth? I forget. Was that?
I don't know. But it was like Mike Godwin's here, so he'll tell us probably, because he's
I closed the
repository of remembering everything that's happened on the internet. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights might be a place to start. Yes, that is. I mean, that is true, but that is also not. That is. There are also a lot of countries that are not party to that.
Yeah, there's more that are that aren't, though.
Yes,
though. The ICCPR is my starting point, frankly. That said, I do think that we need to talk about what morality means, because that is part of the ICCPR, and part of the exemption under Article 19. And I think morality has a very different meaning to us today than it did in the 40s. But that being said, I think that a lot of these, we have had all of these deliberations before, and it's always stunning to me that Mark Zuckerberg thinks that, he's somehow smarter than all of these people who came before him. And I single him out on purpose because I'm not sure that Jack Dorsey actually thinks that he's smarter than those people.
Oh, I actually think that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't think he's smarter. I think he's just doesn't want to deal with this problem. And I think Jack Dorsey might actually think he's smarter, but yeah. But anyway. But anyway, we can talk about that later.
Yeah. I want to have that conversation another time. No, very okay. Well, now you've shifted my thought, but it's okay. No, I feel like they've isolated themselves so much that they're not tapped into this. I mean, David Kaye's been pushing this for a long time. A lot of folks have been pushing this for a long time, that we do already have existing universal human rights frameworks, at least as a basis. And if you look at Facebook's community standards, there's no basis for them. They're not based in anything except somebody's ideology or layers upon layers of ideologies kind of just.
But why should they be based on the ICCPR or on international human rights law? Facebook is not, at the end of the day, the title of Kate's article notwithstanding, it's not a government. No. It's a free set of services that it offers to people. If they want to have, condition those services on the basis of something that would be indefensible from an international human rights law point of view, why shouldn't they? Particularly because, at least as I read the oversight board's interpretations of the ICCPR as a starting point for their content moderation discussion, they're basically telling Facebook, you have to tolerate a lot of the stuff that I would really like to see Facebook not tolerate, because it promotes violence and it promotes, anti-vax stuff. And I'm fine with telling the government of France you can't suppress that stuff, but I'm not so sure I'm fine with telling private creators of forums that's the standard that you should live by too.
And I'm not sure that I'm fine with that on a regulatory basis either, but I think as a starting point, I think we need to let's roll it all back and just say, okay, if we're starting now, instead of putting, and I mean, much love to Dave Vilner if you're listening, but if we're throwing a room together of people to create these rules, maybe we would have picked a more diverse group of people. Maybe we would have picked a more educated group of people. Maybe we would have picked people who had the variety of backgrounds to contribute to this in a meaningful way and bring in those existing frameworks. So no, I mean, do I think that the government should tell Facebook you must abide by the ICCPR? I do not. Do I think that Facebook should reconsider and audit all of its rules and start from the very beginning? Absolutely. Because what's happening right now is, so I'm going to give a clear example this time. So that thing that I was talking about earlier with the LGBTQ products that are not being distributed to certain parts of the world at the same time. So I'm going to use Lebanon as a clear example here. Lebanon is a country where, again, the law is fuzzy a little bit on homosexuality. And then on the other hand, you've got Hezbollah, which is a US designated foreign terrorist organization, but also a state actor because they've got seats in parliament in Lebanon. So that's a tricky position, right? Facebook is not, at least according to our lawyers, might disagree, Facebook's not obliged to take down Hezbollah's speech, right? So they've come up with this policy that it allows, Hezbollah is not allowed to post, but people can talk about Hezbollah and they can talk about them positively, but they can't praise them. And it's just this very twisted policy. And it's specific to certain countries like Lebanon, Myanmar. This came out in The Guardian a couple weeks ago. If folks don't know what I'm talking about, I can find the link in a bit. So at the same time that people are allowed to praise a violent organization, regardless of their politics, whatever we think, people are allowed to praise them, but they can't express their queerness. Is that really a world that we're okay with? I'm just not okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. I know. I think that's a really wonderful way of kind of showing the lack of first principles that you're kind of talking about and talking about replacing. David Botts.
But wait, before we go to David Botts.
Yep.
I just want to ask: is your problem there ultimately with Facebook, or is your problem with Lebanese law?
So,
I mean, what Facebook is doing is it's creating a transnational speech environment that is regulated by 100+ local laws. And so it's concentrating the conflicts between laws. But is it really that Facebook is saying that, you can praise Hezbollah, but you can't express your gender identity? Or is it that Lebanon is saying
no, it's Facebook. It's not Lebanon. I'm positive of that. It is not the Lebanese government. So the Lebanese government does not restrict homosexuality on Facebook. They do not. I mean, even looking at the transparency reports, there are not very many content removal requests. And we do know just from, I've worked a lot in that country, that's not what's happening here.
Okay.
Same with Poland, as far as I'm aware. And if that is true, then Poland is violating European laws.
David Botts, lovely background. Oh wow, that's a picture of my little brother in the background, in like the lower left corner of David's thing. That's our first day of school. I think I was in 2nd grade and he was in kindergarten.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah, David
creates a background for every day of In Lieu of Fun.
In Lieu of Fun. He always has a different one. It's so lovely. He's got he has After Trump up and he has your book up, Jillian. So anyway,
I know. David, I love this so much. It's fantastic.
And he's mute today.
We love David. He's not mute. I have him unmuted.
No. He's miming. Are you going to mime your question?
No, I just I like that he's Vanna Whiting. He's Vanna Whiting. He's just like, yes. David, the floor is yours. I love your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jillian, for joining the crowd today. And I feel for you. I've spent many hours on the Zoom today also. So you're doing great. You're doing really good. So,
thank you.
So free speech as a concept it's super different in Germany versus the United States. And based on you being there for a while, what lessons do you think folks from the U.S. can learn about Germany or other countries? I mean, we talked a little bit about Poland and other countries, but as it relates to speech, and we got good speech and questionable speech, all kinds of speech, but Germany is super different.
Yeah, Germany is really interesting in the sense that, and I'm not an expert on German law, so I'm sure that there are Germans in the audience and I might get something wrong. Please point it out if I do. But obviously, the country's unique history, we've got quite a bit of it here, I'm sure you're all familiar, makes it such that there are things here that you can't say. Now, the way that this is traditionally dealt with, let's say offline, if you were to go out in a park and spray paint a swastika or say things, scream, Holocaust denial in the park next door, I'm literally pointing to a park, sorry, you would be fined most likely. And one of the interesting things that I learned recently from somebody was that somebody here, right, lawyer, I think, was that those fines are actually an effective deterrent, according to some of the studies that have been done, that people, when they are fined, they realize that they're not allowed to say certain things. Sorry, I saw Godwin's comment.
Were you purposely just mouthing things? Because you're not muted.
No, sorry, my mic. I muted myself from my mic. Oh. I said you might say it causes a chilling effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it does. It causes a chilling effect. And, it's funny because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, ooh, could we have a chill? What was sorry, never mind. I forgot my own joke. Anyway. Yeah. So people are, dissuaded from engaging in that type of speech here. And at the same time, there is, I feel, a lot more free here than I do in a lot of the US for a lot of different reasons, right? One of them is guns. You don't see guns here. They don't, they do exist, but they're not prevalent. Another reason is that I do have more personal freedoms when it comes to self-expression here than I feel that I do in the US. I can be topless at the lake, no problem. I can walk down the street with a beer in my hand. And so it is this really interesting balance. So Germany's, and I know obviously carrying a beer is not speech, but some of these things are expression. And I think
they're liberty. They're liberty and like it's liberties. Like it's maybe not speech, but it is like it is a pro-liberty kind of stance.
Yeah, and nudity is self-expression. I mean, that's absolutely expression. But
isn't that true in a lot of countries that different countries and different cultures have different things that they consider, core expressive liberty material. And you say you feel freer for the lack of guns, but of course the gun culture people feel less free for the lack of gun ownership, right? And I've always been there are things that when we the first time, I don't think it's true anymore, but it certainly used to be that when you stayed in a hotel in Germany, you would give them your passport and they would report your location to the cops. And that
is that I don't true, Jillian?
No, they don't report it to the cops, but they have it on record if asked.
So it used to be when you moved in Germany, you had to go report to your local police station, and there would be riots and
you have to have your address on the doorbell, or you have to have your name on the doorbell here. So as a public figure, it's actually and actually this one's really wild too. You also have to have an impressum on your website that has your full address, and I've been violating the law since 2014.
That's bonkers.
But there would be riots in the street if you did that here, and I don't. And I actually think it's completely fine within a reasonable bounds that different cultures have different core liberties that they value, and some of them, if you're somebody for whom being topless on a beach or carrying a beer down the street is, closer to your soul than, say, outlying views of free speech of the type that we protect in the United States, or gun culture, or a number of other things, or not be having to report your location to the police department. Some of which will engage the sensibilities of the audience, I think, more than others. You're going to feel freer in different locations than you will in others.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I totally agree with that, except for the fact that a large majority of the world's people don't have that freedom of movement. And so if they did, I think it would be great if we could just choose the affinity, go for affinity culture. I want to live here. But like if you're in Saudi Arabia,
that's the Ada Palmer world.
Yeah. So like you're in Saudi Arabia, tough luck. And that's the part that really gets to me with all of this, because these companies choose to comply with those countries' restrictions, even in cases where they don't have offices on the ground, where they could, risk getting blocked. Instead, they say, you know what, our product is so worth it to these people that we're fine with them only getting a portion of it. And to me, and it's interesting because Saudi Arabia is actually a really fascinating example for a couple of reasons. One, like Saudi does make these requests. But sorry, am I ranting too much?
No, please keep going, please.
They do make these demands of companies. One of the really famous ones was they demanded that Netflix take down Hassan Minhaj's episode where he criticized MBS. But you know what they didn't take down? The Goop episode that showed vulvas. They didn't take down all of the semi-nudity nudity on Netflix, semi-nudity on YouTube. And so the education and the sorry, that was just the word I went for, but the culture, the access to information and education that people have that they might not have, or they definitely wouldn't have had in previous generations, is just unparalleled. And so from that standpoint, I understand where these companies are coming from. It's worth it to not get blocked, to take down this one item. And yet at the same point, at the same time, at some point you do have to take a stand, right? And for me, that comes when you're quashing entire movements, and that's what I see happening with the stuff around like LGBTQ expression. So, I mean, that kind of got far away from German culture here. I mean,
I think that was great. That was
Yeah.
that was awesome.
Cool.
No, I mean, no, and now you've kind of like, and I'm seeing where you're like wrapping it into and where like the line is, and it's like, it's consistent with like kind of the summary that I kind of gave of the book, and I think it's great. So Christopher Ardress, the floor is yours.
Hey, good to see you, Jillian. It's been a long time Twitter mutual follow, so it's good.
Yeah, no, you've got a last point. I definitely
for like 12 years. So actually, talking about Saudi Arabia would be a good transition to my question, which try to connect both of your books. So I wanted to ask, in light of Morocco, your earlier work in Morocco, whether you have any sense of how the last administration's sort of last-minute decision to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara, how that's been playing with the Sahrawi community in Morocco and the Algerian refugee camps, and in terms of freedom of expression, because we know that they're some of the most repressed people in the world, and those that are on Moroccan occupied territory really have no rights or sort of no access to sort of free media, free expression. So I'm wondering whether your contacts, whether you still kind of keep up with people in Morocco, and what's the sense of sort of that this current administration hasn't distanced himself and hasn't reversed this unilateral declaration of Moroccan sovereignty over this Western Sahara.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. It's like, it feels like a lifetime ago that I was a person who did geopolitics. But I mean, beyond the internet. But yeah, I can still speak to it a little bit. I mean, the sad truth is that most of my friends from Morocco, that I knew back when I lived there, and also that I knew after when I was at Perkman and still doing that work, the vast majority of them are in Europe now. Which is great for them, like on a personal level, but terrible for the country. The country's always had a horrific brain drain, but I was hoping that it would kind of turn around with this generation, and it hasn't. And the entrenchment of these policies in the Western Sahara is just yet another expression of the Moroccan government's insistence on oh God, I'm never going to get to go back if I say the things that I want to say, so I'm not going to say them. I got heavily questioned last time, and I'm like, oh, they're always watching me. Like, yeah, they really are. But yeah, so I try not to comment on this publicly because of this, and we've got a pretty big audience tonight, so I'm going to censor myself a little bit for the sake of being able to visit my friends and like loved ones there. That being said, free expression in Morocco is still very, very much an issue. And during the pandemic, it's felt like I've just felt so distant from people there in a way that I can't, in a way that makes me want to cry, honestly. Some of my friends there are going through legal difficulties. There's been kind of a shift from these more harsh tactics. I mean, I don't know if I feel like this is, maybe this is not the audience, but Morocco's had like a really fascinating history with the way that it's enacted repression, from the literally putting people in vats of acid in like the 60s and 70s, the years of lead, to the repression tactics from the past decade, the surveillance, like Citizen Lab's got some great work on this. And now they've kind of moved towards civil suits, which is this really like interesting shift. We're like, oh, we're trying to be more European in a very, I don't know, Eastern European kind of way. I've just insulted everybody now. I can go home.
Yeah, no, I don't think that you've insulted anyone, but like, I think that's, I mean, it was a hard question, and like, yeah.
It's a good question though, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. something to think about for a long time. We have one last question, and it's from my student Genevieve De La Fara. Hi, Genevieve. You asked a whole bunch of questions, so I'm going to let you know which one I think is probably the most.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, you were going to ask like what question to ask. I'm scrolling down and finding it. I know it was one of the things. Oh, it was your question about the broader public. And
yes.
Yeah, that question.
Okay, sure. So my question is, do you think that the broader public needs to be educated about how technology and data collection works generally and the consequences of that in order to understand which rights of theirs are being infringed upon or perhaps precluded from accessing?
Oh, yeah. I feel like my goal has always been to talk to the broader public. I'm like, I don't get me wrong. I love doing stuff like this. I know you folks are like the more multi-potential.
You wrote a book, so there's no more broader public than that.
No, it's true. But I mean, it's always been my goal, really. Like when I started, so I think Christopher knows this, I guess. Maybe a few of you do, but like I started my career in Morocco. I was teaching English and I wanted to be a writer. And so I do have another book. This is not my first book. I wrote a book about Morocco, but it was like on contract and I'm actually revising it right now, funny enough, but deadlines. But so I started blogging there and was trying to really tell these stories from a country that was growing and progressing and, kind of coming into the internet age. And that's where I discovered internet censorship. So I started blogging because of that. And I started trying to tell those stories. And like, I spoke shitty Arabic and shitty French and was like trying to pull from whatever I could find on the internet using rudimentary Google Translate, relying on my friends, taking language classes, and like just telling these stories. And I guess I'm just a storyteller at my core. And so now coming into this work, or being in this work now for a decade, I've like, here, I'll frame it this way. Right now, there's this like Substack war going on that I think a lot of you are probably familiar with. And the thing that bothers me about it the most.
Why not Domstack? Like, what?
Right?
This is.
Thank you for making that joke. I hadn't thought of that. That's good. The thing that bothers me about it the most is that like I've always taken all of these random writing gigs here and there, not because I'm money hungry, but because I like the idea of being able to write for like this random place, this random op-ed in Texas, this random op-ed in Indonesia. And I've been doing that for years. When I was on the speaking circuit, which I mean, I guess was the past decade of my life, although I have not moved from my apartment in like a year, I would get invites from like historically Black colleges and universities in the US. And those were my absolute favorite. High schools, I'll take it every single time. Like, give me those. If a student emails me and asks me for an interview, I did an interview with an 8-year-old Swedish girl a couple months ago. Like, those
Really?
Yes. Do you get those?
I just got one from a high school student that asked me to do one,
No.
and then I wrote back and said yes, and he said my schedule is full. I filled up, and I got, and I was like, okay.
I kept track. I've probably done like 100 over the years student interviews. A couple days ago, somebody asked me for an autograph for their newborn. I was like, okay, cool. Like, what? So yeah, no, I think that speaking to the broader public is like it's what it's about. I'm not interested in the media elite discussion these days. Although I am on Twitter, obviously.
I loved your Twitter breaks when you were writing the book. I thought that was smart and great. But now you are a famous author and you have this new book out. I'm going to drop it for the last time, and it's been happening in the chat regularly.
Somebody should get on US TV though. That's my holy grail. That in the New York.
We'll make it happen. But we have to wrap. And Jillian, I'm so glad you were finally able to connect and that we were finally able to do this. This has been
so good to see you. And congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry if my brain has been scattered at points tonight.
No, dude, this is a very low stake show. We ask hard questions, but we also have 6 hours on you. So like, I would be like pretty like I'm like pretty like, and also you've been wonderful, and like this has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. We will be back 22 hours and 59 minutes from now, right?
With Ona Hathaway.
Yeah, with Ona Hathaway of Yale Law School, talking about the Internationalists, which is a book she wrote with Scott Shapiro about international human rights.
And if you guys think that Scott Shapiro is the clownish, self-mocking character you have seen on In Lieu of Fun on a serial basis, you're going to be surprised by his co-author.
Yeah. You are. You sure are. Ona
couldn't be more different.
I actually have always been shocked that they like co-authored so well together. It's a testament to like Ona's like humanity that she keeps kind of like like behind the curtain.
We're totally going to ask her about this. It's like
and like
a totally separate Scott Shapiro personality when he's not on Twitter or In Lieu of Fun that doesn't make self-deprecating jokes and isn't like self-loathing and all those things, and is just actually down to business and takes the work really seriously, doesn't constantly make fun of himself.
Yep. So we're going to wrap it. Thank you, Jillian, for coming on. The book is Silicon Values. There is the link in the chat, The Future of Free Speech Under Surveillance Capitalism. Please buy it. And we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, Ben, you can hold it up, Jillian. Hold it up.
We are allowed to express ourselves variably, in different ways, in different places, ultimately at the discretion of Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and that's great
to see you, friend.
There you go.
You're so great. I love